payment on the house, how many people will have an incentive to return the key? And that brings us to here, which is still almost 9 million people. If you remember that the original subprime was only 2 million mortgages, we still have a 9 million problems going forward. And this is today. If the prices fell to this level, as futures are saying, we will be here, which means over 40 million households will have an incentive to return the key. And if they have 10% down payment, that's still here. Nearly 20 million people will have an incentive to return the key. And that will push the house prices even further down. So we have a huge problem in our hands. The real side of the problem and the financial side of the problem. This is what's happening to housing sales. Before the bubble, housing sales around here. Today, it's way down. Existing sales also somewhat below where we used to be. And this is the inventory of unsold houses. And as you can see, inventory rate. So this shows how many months does it take to sell all the houses in the market at the current sales level. And in both cases, we are at the record high, historic highs. It will take over 11 months to sell all the houses, when usually it's only around 4 to 5 months. So this is no pretty picture. It's very, very ugly picture. There are, in my view, 4 types of banking crisis. Localized crisis, systemic crisis, demand for funds, normal demand for funds, and no demand for funds. And this is a normal world in a sense that companies still want to borrow money. And in this case, suppose you have a localized crisis where some banks are bad, but the rest are okay. But because some banks are bad, people are worried. So, well, there's a problem bank. Those problem banks might do something really stupid, and we might be all dead. In that kind of situation. In that situation, you fix the problem very quickly. And in this case, quick non-performing loan disposal, and pursue accountability. Accountability in the sense that those bank managers had the choice to do something else, but they decide to take that action, got themselves into trouble. Since they had the choice to do something else, but they decide not to do it, it's their responsibility for what happened. So you can go after those bank presidents. So pursue accountability. Go after the bastards, basically. And quick non-performing loan disposal. American savings and loan crisis in 1982 was this category. There were a lot of savings and loans that went bad in 1989, but compared to the rest of the financial market, it was a very small problem. So we went very quickly. It's a localized problem. There was plenty of demand for funds. We cleaned up the savings and loan problem, and the economy picked up. But in a systemic case, and the one I faced myself, the savings and the Latin American debt crisis was this one. So many US banks were lending to Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, Venezuela, all these countries. And all these countries went bad, went default. So, as I said earlier, 7 out of 8 US money center banks were underwater. So this is a systemic crisis, not a localized crisis. And if big banks are in that trouble, many small banks or even bigger trouble. So in that case, we had to go very slowly. Non-performing loans, we had to dispose them very, very slowly. It took us 15 years to dispose all the problems. And we used a concept called fat spread. What does that mean, fat spread? Well, fat spread means you allow the bankers to charge very high interest rate for their loans while bringing the deposit interest rates very low. So the prime rate, for example, could be 6%. The deposit rate, 2%. Then in that case, the 4% gap becomes bank's profit. And then that's the way to strengthen the banks so that they can use this money to write off problem loans. And in the Latin American debt crisis, because there were plenty of demand for funds, many American companies still wanted to borrow. You made them borrow with very high interest rates, get the profits, and then use the profits to dispose problem loans. That still took 15 years, but we managed. How about the one the United States is facing now? Well, as I indicated to you earlier, companies did not come back to borrow. That's why money went to the subprime, which means we are not here, we are here. Non-existent demand for funds. Companies are saying, I don't want to borrow money. I have too much trouble with my balance sheets. I never want to see bankers again. So if you are in this category, and you have a systemic banking crisis, what do? We are here. First of all, you cannot go very quickly on the non-performing loans, because when all banks have a problem at the same time, no one can buy your assets anymore. Right? If one bank has a problem and it has to sell its assets, but the rest of the banking system is strong, they'd be happy to buy assets as long as the price is cheap. But when all banks have a problem at the same time, and if they want to sell their assets, there's no one else to buy. So price will collapse, and that will hurt the other banks as well, because other banks hold similar assets. So they have their problems, they have to sell, and the situation can get worse and worse and worse. So in systemic crisis, you have to go slow. And the other thing is this capital injection. We need capital injection in this situation because when all banks have problems and no one's borrowing money, you cannot use fat spread. In order to use fat spread, there has to be borrowers out there willing to pay high interest rates. But when there's no one out there willing to borrow at high interest rates, you cannot use fat spread. That's why government has to inject capital. In the United States, same problem. When Bear Stearns start having problems, at that time, the American government immediately saved Bear Stearns. Well, I don't know how you call it saving it, but at least it did not allow the Bear Stearns to die. But when that happened, all these people in the senators, congressmen, the media, they all went after the government. And they said, how can you save these Bear Stearns, these people making such a huge sum of salaries, when average Americans, the middle class, the workers, they're all suffering? How can you save those bastards? The bashing was so strong that American officials got a cold feet. And says, oh my gosh, we cannot do this anymore. So then next came a relatively large bank called IndyMac. I'm sure you have read all this in the news. This IndyMac is a California bank, and it collapsed. Paulson decided not to save the bank. So a lot of people lost money on IndyMac.